Dear viewers, thank you for joining us. Whenever you hear the term Vedanta, what comes to your mind? I bet Shankara Advaitha is what comes to your mind. Between Swami Vivekananda and Ramakrishna Press, they've ensured to capture the mind chain of all the seekers worldwide and almost made Advaita, Shankara Advaita, as synonymous with Vedanta. Is it really the case? The answer would be emphatic no, because Advaita is one point of view, one interpretation of what Vedas try to say. So, what is the alternative we're going to talk in this series? We want to talk about Tattva Vaada, enunciated by Srimad Ananda Tirtha Muni, which is commonly known as Madhacharya, and his philosophy is commonly called as Advaitha. Though there are several varieties of Advaitic philosophies, his specific model is called Tattva Vaada for a reason, because it contrasts Shankara's metaphysics, whose bedrock is Buddhist nihilism, a denial of value, real value for our day-to-day life. If you go through the history of this part in India, Buddhism was dominant for centuries, ever since Buddha came till Shankara appeared. Buddhism and Jainism, primarily Buddhism, seemed to be the most dominant metaphysics in the subcontinent. It was seen as anti-Vedic, although in reality, if you go through the details of metaphysics of Buddhism, it primarily borrows heavily from Vedic ideas. He removes certain things which he doesn't like. Otherwise, it is almost Vedic centered only. Shankara appeared on the scene, corrected this, aligned the whole model closer to Vedas, and added quite a bit of a theistic component, which was almost missing in Buddhism. In which case, this leads us to another question. If indeed Shankara gave a course correction to the Buddhism and brought it closer to Vedic principles and added the missing theistic component, what is the need for another philosophy which Srimad Ananda Tirtha Muni enunciated? What was the need to be more theistic? Or even for that matter, what is the need to have another philosophy altogether at all? This is a very interesting question which needs to be answered. And this is what we're going to discuss in this series. And our young scholar, okay, he doesn't like to be called as a scholar, but I always treat him as a scholar, Krishna Kadri, is going to talk about it. As a very short introduction, he's a brilliant grad from IIT Madras. He's a serial entrepreneur. He has already had a couple of startups on artificial intelligence based startup, and he sold them off. And so he comes with an excellent mix of what should you say, a common, normal, day-to-day guy with a scholarly knowledge. How did he attain this knowledge? He studied for more than 2 decades under stalwarts of Tattva Vaada philosophy, like Sri Haridas Bhatt, as well as Satyanarayana Acharya. To cap it all, he's being mentored by Sri Vidyasri Satirtha, who is the head of Vyasaraja Matha, which follows the Madhva Sampradaya. Vidyasri Satirtha needs no introduction. He's a scholar, great scholar himself, principal of Sanskrit College. He has helped so many other young swamis learn, and he's the one who is now decorating the illustrious pita of the mutt started by Sri Vyasatirtha. Now we will request Krishna to help us understand why this Tattva Vaada. What is this Tattva Vaada? And why this at all? And we'll pick it up from there. He will explain. Then probably I'll ask a couple of questions and see his viewpoints on the responses. And we'll build up from there. We want to do it very leisurely, methodically, step by step, remaining positive in our approach in presenting why Tattva Vaada is a very important, what should I say, knowledge set to acquire. Even if you're an Advaiti, it's impossible to move forward unless you know what this Tattva Vaada is all about. After all, Shankara himself has said, Bhavadvaitam sa kuryat, karmadvaitam kena chetam. He was very clear about it. Therefore, without much ado, I would request Krishna to take over and start the conversation. Krishna, to you.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Hari Om. Narasimha Akhilajnana Matadvanta Divakaraha Jayatyamirasagyana Sukha Shakti Payonidhi Abhramam Bhangarahitam Ajadam Vimalam Sada Anandatirthamadulam Bhaje Tapatrayapaham Bhavati Yadanubhava Yadamukopi Vagmi Jadamatirapi Jantur Jayate Prajnamaulihi Sakala Vachana Cheto Devata Bharati Sa Mama Vachasi Nidhattam Sannidhim Manasecha Apadamaudi Varyantam Gurunam Akritim Smaret Tena Vignaha Pranashyanti Siddhyanti Cha Manorathaha. Namaskara, Namaste to all of you. Before we start on Tattva Vaada, I would like to just, before I get to those questions, I would like to very briefly present about the different aspects of Tattva Vaada. And even before that, I think we need to understand who Sri Madhacharya is. So traditionally, he is considered the one of the founders or the proponents of the philosophy called as Tattva Vaada, as our friend just now told. He is known by various names. Purna Prajna is the first name that he was given. Srimad Ananda Tirtha Bhagavat Padacharya is how we all refer to him. And he took his sannyas at a very young age, and he was there all the way. Traditionally, he is still not supposed to have left his body, mortal body. He is still supposed to be studying under the feet of Sri Vedavyasa in Badri. And most importantly, let's look at his works. He's supposed to have written many works. 37 of them are considered famous. And that's what they go by the name of Sarvamula. And the most interesting part about this Sarvamula is the breadth of subjects that he takes up. It is not, many people think that he's just talking about Madhacharya is just there to rebut Advaitha or anything like that. Advaitha is one of the systems. Of course, it is a predominant system then. And so majority of his work does deal with the Advaita. But for him, most important was to basically establish what he thought was the final conclusions of the Vedanta and finally what is going to help humans. So everything was written with that. And so in that lieu, if you see, he has basically written works on not just the Prasthanatraya, which is the Upanishads, or the Brahma Sutras, or the Gita. He has even written on the Veda itself directly. On one hand, he has basically even written one on Mahabharata. It's not real line-to-line commentary over there in Mahabharata. He has a tract, he has an extract of the whole thing there, and he has highlighted the conclusive portions. And then he has written on Tantra, for example, which is basically on how do you do ritual, and it includes even details on how you should construct temples, what are all the things that you need to do there. Of course, then the rituals for own, day-to-day things. So, and basically he goes the entire spectrum, whatever is needed for sadhana. And he's the only acharya who to have covered so much of, what you call the conceptual spectrum per se. And so his point is, so let's basically look at these 37 works. And there are other works which are related to prakaranas. They are called prakarana granthas. So therein he examines some concepts of Advaita, like upadhi or ajnana. And then there are some other works like which talk about the ontology of Advaita. Then there is another work wherein he basically he gives, it is called Vishnu Tattva Nirnaya. It is like the basic text which it is the most fundamental text in terms of establishing all the important concepts of Vedanta. Another very important thing in his works is that he establishes a very logical framework for how do you interpret Veda. And so there is so we will come to that in the future sessions hopefully. And yeah, so that is about him, and he has been succeeded by many illustrious scholars, Jayatirtha, Vadiraj Tirtha, Raghavendra Swami. I mean, these are some of the more popular ones. Vyasarajuru, they are some of the more popular ones. And there is also a good section of the Haridasa group in Kuta in Karnataka primarily, but of course they were there in other places also, who have been affiliated to the Dvaita school of Vedanta. Now, the very word Dvaita itself is little confusing, because even Shankaracharya refers to the Nyaya school as Dvaitins, for example, right? And then of course there is a Western mindset which thinks of the mind-body problem as the dualism and things like that. But in our case, Dvaita comes from two principles. One is Swatantra, another one is Paratantra. So that is his, that is the reason for calling it Dvaita. Tattva Vaada is because it is really Tattva there. It is not an illusion. It truly is so. Therefore, it is called Tattva Vaada, because this is a doctrine that propounds Tattva. It is called Tattva Vaada.
Can I interrupt for a moment?
Go ahead, please.
Yes. It's a very interesting point you made that he calls it tattva because it's not an illusion. That's, I think, is a fundamental difference. And the way you beautifully said what is the duality from Madhacharya's viewpoint, that is stating that the duality is between the only independent entity being Vishnu and everything else being dependent. That is the duality we're talking about when compared to other kind of dualities in other schools. That's a very nice explanation. But coming back to this, your statement that because it is not an illusion, therefore it is called Tattva Vaada. What is that you meant by saying it is not an illusion? Which is not an illusion?
Okay. So basically, let's look at Dvaita from the first principles. We'll come to that question a little later.
Okay.
So if you look at Dvaita, if you look at the first principles, right? Let's not tag ourselves to Dvaita or anything like that, right? Vedanta, like we are all beings who are experiencing lots of things around us. There is a lot of information that we get. We also have a lot of experiences like happiness, misery, pain, elation. There are lots of human beings, not just human beings. I mean, beings experience a lot of emotions over there. And then we have these three states, where you have you are in the waking state, you are in deep sleep, you are somewhere in the middle, which is you have dreams. So there is a lot of universal experience which says that we are trying to that all of us experience. Now, what Acharya does is, like everybody else, like all other schools, these basically trying to tell, based on the pramanas, what is the best model that explains all these things. And therefore, he says that when you say tattva, basically it is anything that is not an illusion, anything which is not an illusion. Thing could be either a substance or an attribute or an action. It could be anything. Padartha. Okay, it could be anything which is not an illusion is a tattva. Okay, and what is the fundamental characteristic of tattva? Anaropitam tattva. Anything that is not superimposed. For example, you have the stock example of the rope on the snake on the rope. It is not tattva because it is aropita. Yeah, and so we can get into that. The other main point is that so his entire system, to understand his entire system, we need to understand how he builds it up from the first principles. So when you look at first principles, you have all these universal experience. So he basically says that these experiences are all changing. Okay, there is a lot of change around us, and the body is also changing, but the experiencer, which is that I, okay, that is unchanging. He's an observer. He's observing all these different changes that are happening around him, and it's not just because of memory. I whatever I remember yesterday is not what I remember today. It's not like that. It is not because of memory that it is unchanging. It is an intuitive feeling wherein I say that I am not changing. This is the same I that I had yesterday. So one cornerstone or one foundation of his philosophy is the fact that there is something called as sentient being, consciousness, chetana, which is different, fundamentally different from jada. Okay, see, look at it like this, right? At this his point of time, except the Charvakas, everybody else had accepted that
Can I,
that is the case.
can I once again interrupt you? So you just mentioned Charvakas, right? Can you talk a little bit about Charvakas? Because everybody may not be aware what the Charvaka you're referring to.
Sure. So Charvakas are, the name supposed to be, Charu Vak, basically. Charu means, beautiful, and Vak is, or pleasant speech.
You
So
talk
they are supposed to be, Lokayata Mata also, because, that is what is prevalent everywhere. In fact, I mean, if you consider the fact that, people just spend some 5 minutes every day in their, they were in some 5 minutes, 10 minutes you give away. If you take that thing away, most of the people are in fact quite atheistic or that way. That is the prevalent thing itself, right? I mean, our connection to God is like very, very minimal at the end of the day.
so,
But yeah, the Lokayata Mata is that, and there is also the argument that you are an atheist for an opposing school of thought at the end of the day, right? So yeah, so basically Charuvak is something that which is supposed to have come from Brihaspati, surprisingly, and he's supposed to have taught this person called Charvaka. His mention comes in Mahabharata Shanti Parva also, and yeah, he's supposed to have taught atheism. And atheism in those days, actually, like we will see, right, every school of thought needs to have defined its own epistemology. When you say epistemology, you need to first define what are the sources of your knowledge. And when you define those, based on that, you can go ahead and then say that, okay, I agree, or I believe, I hold these principles to be true. So so first is the epistemology, then comes ontology. I believe that there is a God because there is a source of knowledge about that God, right? So this is a Charvaka doesn't believe in any other source of knowledge other than pratyaksha, a sensory perception. Okay. So in fact, Madhacharya has a little debate with him in the third adhyaya, I believe. So wherein he says that how can you, Charvaka, not accept the existence of soul or sentient being or chetana as independent or fundamentally different from the body? See here, I mean, in today's world, right, we all think that consciousness is a product of the brain or is product of, it's something which is changing, happening in the body kind of thing, right? But most religions don't agree with that. I mean, but only Acharya gets into the point of actually debating. For him, the very judgment or the very experience of my body, mama deha, right, is an indication that I am different from the body. Okay, so this is, and again, this you will, when you get to this thing, right, you will he basically insists that even a Charvaka needs to accept that it is inevitable that even he accepts that there is something called as which is fundamentally different. The experience of the experiencer is a given in all our experiences. When I
okay.
say, I eat, I am happy, I am this thing, that I is always there. It is also an object of experience. It is not just the subject. So that is the only case. Shankaracharya differs there, but that is the only case where you have the subject and the object of the knowledge being one and the same. So based on that, he says that, look, you need to accept that there is something which is fundamentally different, and that different entity is nothing but sentience. That is chetana. Okay, you need to give me a minute now. 1 minute.
Sure, sure. I mean, I will also grab this minute and say